All right, welcome to part 2 of PBL in the middle school classroom. Now I'm going to focus on workshops. So workshops are essentially the actual teaching piece that teachers bring in to the project. So workshops can work different ways depending on what your students need. Typically for myself in the middle school classroom, most of my workshops were mandatory. So a workshop kind of looks like in a traditional classroom when you would do your lecture part, the PowerPoint with the notes and all of that. In PBL, ideally workshops are customized for the students based on what it is that they need. So you're not really necessarily talking to all the students at the same time. In a high school classroom where the students are experienced in PBL, I kind of see this as the students have resources that they're getting their information from, whether they found those themselves or the teacher provided them to the students. And then if a student needs extra help, the teacher will have certain times that they schedule a workshop, and the students can go and basically have that one-on-one or small group instruction from the teacher. Now, for myself, like I said, in middle school, I had mandatory workshops. So the way I ran them is either just the full class, we're taking notes together, we're going through a PowerPoint, they're all getting the information. That was mostly what I did, especially with the 6th graders, and even sometimes with the 7th grade, simply because I knew that they all needed the information. With my more advanced students, with my older students, I would take the other approach of, here are your resources. By the end of class today, I need you to answer the following questions. So I'd give them like 5 questions or so that would show that they understood the concept covered that day. So let's say that day we were talking about, for this ecosystem project, the differences amongst the different kind of consumers. So they would probably have a reading piece, probably from a website that I found. The students would read through it. They look at, okay, what differentiates a primary level consumer from, say, a tertiary level consumer. They would read through and answer the questions. If they were not able to answer the questions simply based on that reading passage, then I would say, okay, so halfway through the class today, guys, I'm going to have a workshop in the back of the room. You can come join me back there. And so students who had the self-awareness enough could come to my workshop, and that's when I would talk about the different levels of consumers. So it's good for the students who maybe just need a different way of learning things or just need a little extra assistance. Workshops are also really good for your differentiation amongst the different types of learners that you have in your class. So one thing that I did once was I grouped the students based on similarities in how they learned. And it was just a temporary grouping. I know it's not ideal to put, all your SPED kids together and all your ELL students together. I get that. But for my sake, I did it just for the sake of the workshop. So what I was able to do is all class period, they were all working on an assignment, and I would go from table to table with my spiel, if you will, my workshop, and I was able to give a customized workshop to each of the different groups. So my gifted kids got a variation of my workshop that my special ed students got. So everyone got the same information, but it was tailored to what they needed. That takes a lot of time and a lot of prep, but I really enjoyed it. And I think the kids got more out of it that way than if I had just been talking to the whole group at the same time or did the voluntary workshops. Okay. Moving on, benchmarks. So your benchmarks throughout PBL are similar to any kind of benchmark you would have. These are simply checkpoints throughout the project. Middle schoolers need a lot of checkpoints. They need a lot of formal and informal ones. So your formal ones are the ones that you're going to grade. So in this ecosystem project, a significant portion is all the math that they had to do in terms of calculating how many calories there were for the whole island, and how many calories each animal would need, and based on that information, they would determine the rough population of each of those species. So at some point before the end of the project, they had to have this math finished and make sure that it was correct. So about halfway through, as one of my benchmarks, I said, okay, on Friday, before the last 10 minutes of class, your mathematician in your group has to come to me with your numbers so I can check them. So that was a graded benchmark for the students, and everyone in the group was held responsible for it. Again, while you split the responsibilities amongst the group members, they are all still responsible for playing a part in that. You know, you can't just have one kid in the group doing all the math. And an informal benchmark would be something like, okay, by the end of class today, I want to see that you have 5 slides done in your PowerPoint. And then at the end of class, you would just go and check all the groups, see if they have their 5 slides. Or better yet, if you're on Google Drive, you know, they've shared their presentation with you, and you can just quickly get on your computer and see that 5 slides have been completed, no matter what 5 slides they were. So it's just keeping the students on track throughout the project. Now, sometimes your benchmarks can go so far as to be, you know, little quizzes that you give them, other assignments that you give them as well. So this is not just checking the progress of the project itself, but you're also checking the progress of the learning that is happening within the project. So these are your formative assessments, your checks to make sure that the students understand what is happening. So this can come in the form of an exit ticket, a warm-up, even a vocabulary quiz. Something that's graded that keeps the students on track. Critiquing. Critiquing is actually a very large part of PBL, not just for the students, but for the teachers as well. And I'll go into that after I speak about the student part. Throughout the course of the project, you definitely want to be giving the students feedback on how they're doing. Another key piece, and this helps with the 21st century learning skills, is keeping the students accountable for each other. So you can follow a number of different protocols on how you want the students to give each other critiques. I see a lot of teachers tend to keep the critiquing at the end of the project, so the students do their presentation and then they're given critiques from the students, which is fine, but I think there's something to be learned from critiquing a project before it's finished and allowing the students to make changes based on the criticisms of their classmates. So one time, for one of the projects that we did for 7th grade, not this ecology one, but another one, about halfway through the project, I put 2 groups together, and they presented what they had simply to each other. And we followed the critical friends protocol, and I had the students go through and give a critique on what they saw. And then I stood there and wrote down everything and gave it to the group and said, okay, these are the things that the other group asked you to work on, and I would like to see these changes done in your presentation. So when the final presentation came, that was part of my grading, was to see, did they actually take the criticisms into account as they were finishing up their project. With middle school, it's hard to kind of get them to be honest in their critiquing. They can get to that point, but it takes a lot of training and a lot of guidance on your part. You can find the Critical Friends protocol online. I uploaded a sheet that you can kind of guide yourself through, but it doesn't really explain the protocol itself. Essentially, you're saying something that you like about what you see, something that you wonder, which is a nice way of just saying. It's just asking a question. And then the next step, which is simply a suggestion of what the person can do. Throughout the protocol, the people who are being critiqued cannot comment until the very end, and then they can speak to what people said. So it's a lot of training for students, but if it's something that they get used to, I think it can be an effective tool. You can also use something like a gallery walk where students simply put their pieces up, whether it's on the computer or on the wall, and everyone just walks through and they can write comments on sticky notes and put it next to it. So whether it's, I really love that you included this aspect, or, I think I noticed that you're missing this piece of information, and then you can have them do it this way. With critique, you have to have really good interpersonal relationships in the classroom, because you don't want the critiques to come out of just personal problems that the students are having with each other. So definitely work to build a culture within your classroom where the students can critique each other and they're honest about it. It's not just, oh, I really love the font that you used for your PowerPoint. Like, that's not a critique. But overall, I think it's a good skill for the students to learn. You also want to be using Critical Friends or gallery walks or critiquing in general when you yourself are planning a project. Whether it's by yourself or you're doing it with colleagues, you want to bring this to other people and have them critique your project before you ever use it in the classroom. Okay, and finally we have the actual presentation. So what I typically do with my middle schoolers is each group is responsible for a different topic within the project. Therefore, when it comes to presentation time, the other groups are not disengaged because they're hearing something new, something that they themselves did not do. They're also filling out a worksheet or something for me to show that they were listening, answering a few questions. At the high school level, I've even heard of presentations being done where the students are simply presenting to their teacher while the rest of the class is behind the teacher working on their own presentations or working on an alternative assignment for the class, which is awesome. I think that's the point that you kind of want all the students to get to within PBL, is that presentations are done for the teacher, for someone who's actually going to pay attention and grade the students, and not take away student time when they could be learning and working on their own work. Outside panels, so this is bringing in an audience for the students, an authentic audience for the students. So this can be anything from, I've had my students presenting to younger students, doing presentations for them, teaching them a different concept. So the 8th graders did it for chemistry this year. They did chemistry demonstrations for the younger kids. But I think the best example is when the students had a geology project this year, and we were actually able to get geologists from a nearby gas company to come in and watch the presentations. So the students were not only held accountable for the information that they had, because if they put something on there that wasn't true, the geologists knew, but ultimately it was a huge learning experience for them because the geologist gave them a lot of information as well. Plus, the students had to get used to presenting to someone who wasn't me. Because they got comfortable with me, they got comfortable with their peers. Okay, so that's it. If you have any questions, I know I didn't really talk about PRBL a lot. I'll put some resources in the file for that. Otherwise, let me know if you have any questions. All right, thank you so much.